Well, welcome. It's been a very long month, I feel like, since the last time you guys saw this beautiful face here. Um, to that end, I think at the end of this, we're going to talk about how we can do these more regularly. Let's step up the timing here so we're not waiting a month in between these meetings. Maybe we can do every other week, and then scrunch it down from what would have been a year to like before the end of this year. I think just by round of a nod, I think we're feeling pretty happy with that. Okay. So at the end, we'll talk about what those days would look like, holidays in the way and such. Um, Before we get into this, so today we're going to go over the get organized section. So last time we just kind of talked about what it looks like to do this. Obviously, we've had some feelers out there. We don't really know what it's going to look like. We're kind of growing. We've never done get organized with more than one client at a time. So this will just be fun in and of itself, to try to see how this works. But before we get into that, I want to know, like, does anybody have anything they want to bring to our attention? Does anybody want to mention anything? Does anybody have any early questions before the end when we get to do the rapid fire stuff? Just raise your hand or yell out if you're not on video. Again, I do love seeing video so I can get some kind of visual feedback here, but you don't have to have a video. Nobody. All right, cool. Love the interactions today. All right, so let me share.
Robert, if you want, I can ask, questions from the audience that I think people are thinking about, live in the mood or something like that.
Oh, hey, this is CJ, by the way. Y'all haven't met CJ. CJ's new to the team. Apparently, he's a mind reader also, so that'll be nice. Yeah, if you have some, they'll pick up their actions later. Can you guys see my screen? Can I get some nods? All right, cool. So super useful slideshow here. What's everybody's opinions on Mighty Networks? I know we've posted some things on there. There hasn't really been any interaction yet. Obviously, there hasn't been a need for a lot of interaction yet on y'all's end. I'm trying to post in there sporadically. I think as we go, once we start hitting topics, I think there's going to be a lot of questions that happen there. But does anybody have any trouble with Mighty Networks? Does anybody have no idea what I'm talking about when I say Mighty Networks? Thanks, CJ.
I have a question. Is there a place where you're posting the slideshows that I'm missing? Just because I wanted to go back to the schedule from last week, the tentative schedule that we had. Is that somewhere in Mighty Networks?
There's not. I was intending on doing it all for all the meetings from here on out. Whoa. Yeah, we can basically, I can create a slide in here. We can either add it to the topic itself, or I can just have one for slide decks. Anybody got a preference? If you give a thumbs up, you have to give a preference.
For me personally, I'd like the slide decks together, and you can just title whatever the main thing was, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, so the majority of these will have like a slide deck. So yeah, I'll just create a topic here that'll just have all the slide decks and the videos attached with those. So maybe it'll just be like total resources, but okay, perfect. I like that.
Appreciate
Kim, can you make a note? So I remember. Yeah, go ahead.
Will we have access to this after the program's done?
Yeah, so we talked about that at the end of the last session. And I think, yeah, we don't pay anything for this. So if we left you guys with access to this, I just don't know like if it's actually going to get used. So I'll let it run until people stop responding in there. But yeah, there's no reason for us to get rid of it. Does anybody like hate Mighty Networks already? Like they totally crashed their computer or anything? No? All right, cool. Right Capital. So Right Capital was the planning software. So everyone should have gotten a link to upload their information into Right Capital. We're going to go through kind of Joe Exotic and Carol Baskin here, which is like me and some made up stuff. But does anybody have any strong opinions towards this? I'm going to break it down like section by section here, but does anybody have any strong opinions about it that they want to share? All right. Okay, cool. So when we're in here, everybody should have logged in. Does anybody have any hard time getting in? Did everybody get in? Nods. I love the nods. I got some thumbs up. Okay. Cool. So everybody got in. If you didn't get in, shoot us a message, put it in the chat. We can send you a link to it. So the biggest thing in this tool, this is a garbage in, garbage out tool. So because we're doing this kind of one-to-many, normally I would sit down with each and every one of you and kind of go through to make sure we have the right accounts so we can use the right data. We're not going to do that here, obviously, but what I do want to do is kind of go section by section as I normally would, and then let you tell me if you had any issues or ask any questions. We can hopefully compare and contrast that way. So the first thing you see when you log in is the balance sheet. So when we're working with clients, obviously we want to, and this is what you're going to be doing for yourself, right? So you want to protect and grow your assets. You want your assets to be as large as possible over time. You want to decrease your liabilities if and whenever possible. And that math effectively, so this minus this equals your net worth. And we want to watch our net worth rise over time. So you're all new grads. Some of you are going to be better off than others. Some of you are just going to have a big fat negative number here. That is super common. Some of you are going to have a positive net worth. I only have this because of like the house. So like that's the only reason we're doing anything up here. Within that, you should be able to also see some budget information. So for yourself, so when you log in, you should be able to see kind of expenses and everything. And this is all tracked from the accounts that you connected. So any account you connected is reading into this. If you made a manual update, it's not going to read it. And then it should have tried to break down the categories. So in that welcome email, there were some videos where you got to see my shiny face and listen to my beautiful voice, talking about how to recategorize those. Did anybody have any problem with that? Did anybody just decide totally just like, fuck that, I'm not doing that? Nobody? That's a lie. Somebody chose not to. I would not normally, so. All right, so this profile page, this is kind of the main information page. Okay, so what we're gonna do today is we're gonna use Joe Exotic and Carol Baskin. We're gonna kind of see. So the first thing you're gonna notice here is there's almost always gonna be at least one account that says import in progress. All right, does anybody have this? Got some hands, okay. So import in progress, what this says is that it's having trouble with the connection. So it could be on Right Capital's end, it could be on Arvest Central Mortgage Company's end, and basically it means that the data didn't transfer over. So when you have that in effect, that means that I don't have that mortgage here, so I need to add that loan in if I want my data to match, right? So right now it looks like I have a lot more. So once I add a mortgage, we're gonna add a loan. This is just gonna be mortgage. The original amount was $213,400. Payment is $1150. Whoa. The interest rate is 4.25. The origination was 2018. The loan terms is 30. The balance is 208,950. I only know this because I'm in the process of refinancing. I don't imagine anyone here would be able to spit off figures like that, and I don't expect you ever should. I only know that because I'm going through a refinance. So then I'm basically just going to say this is a joint, and then we're going to save it. So my net worth just took a huge dive. So I had that cool net worth I was really proud of, and now I'm at like 20 grand. So still good. Okay, so does anybody want to talk about one of their issues and maybe I can help solve it? Obviously, we're not going to share any of your screens. I'm not going to show any of your information to the group, but if you have a question about something about import in progress, is there anything I can help through right now? I'm seeing some no's. Okay. So the next thing is banking. So what we normally do with clients and what I think you should do for yourselves is to kind of map out what all these accounts are. Okay, so I had some accounts that weren't going to read over properly, so I manually uploaded them. And then I have USAA, which came over great, right? So all that data is in there. What we want to say is, how do we divide those accounts up and what are they for? Okay, so obviously I like to name my accounts. So we have a USA savings account here for a Disney trip. So we're saving up for a Disney trip. We write it on that way. We put the money aside. This money is going to be huge because I can't go to Disney this year. I don't know if you guys have seen the reports. Disney World is open. You have to wear a mask, 50% capacity. The ride for Space Mountain is 5 minutes. So there's that, but not going to Disney World this year. We have a joint checking account. So this is where all of our money dumps into. So both of my wife and I's paychecks dump into one singular account before we divide it up amongst bills and expenses. We have an emergency fund account. So this is where, this is if something were to happen, like if I lose my job, don't fire me. If she loses her job, if a global pandemic happens and hours get cut at work, this is where we can go back and say, hey, at least I'm not worried about making a mortgage payment. I'm not worried about food. I'm not worried about internet. I'm not worried about Disney Plus getting canceled. So we can still get by with the bare essentials, the bare necessities. Yeah. All right. So emergency fund. We have a car fund. So a car fund we use, basically we don't have a car note right now. So we're putting money aside, paying a car note to ourselves. So if and when we do need a car, we can just buy it outright. Right. You guys are pretty early on in the career. Some of you are working full time. Some of you are working residence. You don't have to have all these accounts. We just want to make sure that I know where the money is going and I know where the money is being spent. I have a golden doodle that is very expensive to get groomed, and she gets groomed regularly-ish. So we set aside money for that to happen. And then when this goes to zero, I just get sad. And then we have a travel fund. This is where we would normally travel in a normal year. Obviously, nothing is happening this year. So I would like to get those reservations that I had to China, where I'm supposed to be at right now. I wish I had that money again. But that's just going to sit at United until I book a flight. So that's not in here. But does anybody have any questions about the banking section, or does anybody have any issues that they want to talk about? Is anybody finding value in the things that I'm saying right now?
So for your USAA accounts, are these all separate accounts that you have at USAA, or are they one big account that you've split into different categories?
Super question. So these are actually separate accounts. So some banks allow you to build out separate accounts, and some banks require you to like pay for those, right? So if you have account opening fee, you're not going to do that. USAA allows me to open up like as many accounts as I want. We also like Ally Savings. So I didn't connect my Ally account here, but Ally Savings allows you to do what you called like subcategories. We call them buckets. So with Ally, I can open up one account here, like a savings account. And then under that savings account, I could have dog grooming, travel, Disney trip, all categorized out. So it'd only come over as one account, but it would, at Ally, I'd see the separates. So that's really down to your banking structure. So each organization is going to have their own rules, their own strategies, their own this and everything. So find whatever works for your organization. If you find out that your bank totally sucks, then you just find a better bank. A lot of me grew up with a bank down the street, right? So that's the bank you first started with, right? So for me, it was Bank of America. That was just where it was. I had my credit card through Bank of America, I had everything through Bank of America. As I grew, I moved where there wasn't a Bank of America nearby. So then I got Chase, and then I got USAA when I was in the military, and now I'm out. And then I realized USAA has terrible like long-term savings rates. Then I got Ally for more savings, stuff like that. So that's kind of how that's working. But that's a good question. Thank you. Anybody else got a question about banking? Nothing, not one question. All right, that's cool. All right, so the next thing is credit cards. So this is where your credit card should auto load in. Credit cards are one thing we don't want to manually enter, right? So I can manually input some bank accounts up here because they're going to stay like pretty flat. Like I don't change these ever. These are just how much is within those accounts. Credit cards are going to change. I use my credit card every day. There's literally an Amazon package sitting on my front porch right now because I order stuff, right? It's a pandemic. So this is where we want to make sure we have our credit cards loaded. So it's the credit cards you use, and also if you have old credit cards that you don't use, you still want to add those for a couple of reasons. One, you want to be able to see all your assets in one place, all your liabilities in one place, all your expenses and everything in one place, right? But also if you have an old, let's call it like a Kohl's card, or if you have an old, who doesn't exist anymore, Sears. If you have like a Sears card from way back in the day when you started freshman year of undergrad and you had to buy a bed and you went to Sears and they gave you a credit card because you got like 5% back. If you don't track that, you're never going to log into Sears to look at it. So if you have it here, at least you'll see if something fraudulent happens and that account gets put in. So this would be a good place to track it because you're never going to log into Sears otherwise. Anybody have any issues or anybody have any questions about credit cards? Does everybody have a credit card? Does anybody not have a credit card? I can't see anybody on the phone. I'm going to assume you all said you do. If you don't, or if you know somebody who's looking for a credit card, CJ and I just had a client today who was talking about credit card, and the two best secured credit cards that we came across were the Discover It card, which is a $200 secured card. What that means is you don't actually have to have credit. You can get it if you have really shit credit. And then you have to have a bank account attached to it. So it's almost like a debit card, but it reports to the credit agencies. So it helps you build credit over time. So no annual fees, no minimum this, no minimum that. You pay it off like you would normally, but that's a good way to build it. So no.
Could you repeat? Sorry.
Yeah.
Could you repeat what that's called again?
The Discover It secured card.
Okay.
So actually, let me see if I still have it pulled up. We don't get anything. I told you this a couple times, and I'll say it multiple times from now on. Obviously, we don't have any kind of partnerships where we get kickbacks or anything I'm going to recommend to you. We just find good stuff. So right now, and don't always listen to just me, right? So I got this from NerdWallet. I'm not the smartest person in this room, and I'm by myself. So this is the Discover It secured card. So this is what we figured out was kind of the best secured card today. So 0%, zero annual fee. You get access to all the benefits of Discover. It does have a $200 secured line, meaning you have to have an account attached to it for $200. So they're only going to loan you stuff that they already know you have, which is why it's secured. Then after 8 months, they can basically unsecure it as long as you make all your payments on time, and it helps build credit. So for those who have very low credit, this is a good way to kind of grow it. We'll talk about credit in another discussion, but we'll go into deeper on how that's kind of calculated.
I have a quick question since you're mentioning kind of a credit
Yeah.
card suggestion. Of course, in the future now, not in COVID times, but regarding rewards or flight miles or cards with rewards in general, do you have any suggestions for those?
I will when we get to the credit session.
Okay.
I don't have it on top of my mind, but I'll kind of build out, and I'm going to steal this from other people. Like I'm not the best person, but I'll give you kind of some basics for each type of card, and kind of how you can use these, how you can lose using those, and then whether or not you should do it, right? So it's not always the best chase points, but if you're going to use credit anyway, then you can use it to your best advantage. So when we do the credit session, which we'll talk about in a little while, I'll have that ready for it.
All right, thanks.
Perfect. Let's get that out of there. All right, so anybody have any other issues with credit cards? Nope, okay. Investment accounts. Okay, so investment accounts is where you're gonna attach any kind of employer-sponsored plans that you have. Some of you have worked before you went to school, so maybe you had 401k, 403b, 457, TSP, HSA, 529. These are all letters that mean things, and I will explain what they all mean in the investment session. But if you have any accounts that go by any of those rules, this is kind of where you add them, right? So in here, I have examples of, this is just a regular taxable investment account for future home purchase. When you want to move from Arizona to California at some point, you have to save for years and years and years to get there. Otherwise, you will never make it. 403b, this would be Carol Baskin's retirement account through a government employee. And then Joe Exotic's 401k would be an account through a civilian employee. So residency users, people in residency, you probably might have access to one of these, whether it's a 403b or 457. You may not have access for the first like 30 to 90 days, at which points then you can add to it. If you're working full-time and you're at retail or wherever you're located, you should have access to that again within the first like 30 days to 6 months. And we'll talk about during the investment section of kind of how to pick and choose from those accounts on what you want to do. But anybody have any issues or questions about the investment section of Right Capital? Nope.
I have a quick question. This might be like in the insurance part, but where would you put an HSA account?
HSAs is like magical thing, right? So we'll talk about HSAs in investment section of the meeting, but for everybody here, we got time, right? HSAs is a health savings account. So you're gonna have access to it if your employer offers a high deductible health savings plan. So an HSA allows you to put aside like $3,550 a year to use for health expenses. It goes in tax deductible, meaning you get to remove it from your income, and it grows tax-free or tax deferred, and it comes out tax-free as long as you use it appropriately. So generally it's gonna auto-load into this investment section, and that's where we're gonna keep it, right? So most HSAs require you to have a minimum amount of money before you can invest it. That minimum is generally $1,000. So if you have an HSA and you just started work, there's no way there's $1,000 in it, but it'll just kind of sit in this section. Later on, if you continue to contribute to that, it'll have assets that you can then choose to invest or not. And this is why it stays in this section. Good question. Anybody else got questions about the investment section? No? All right. All right, so stock plan. Mine's not opening. So stock plan is if you ever work for a company that offers you stock options. You all just graduated pharmacy programs. I doubt you ended up in one of these companies, but in case you had a past life at Facebook or Tesla, CJ used to work at MySpace. I love pointing that out. So if you had stock options where they kind of give you a piece of the company as a percentage of revenue, this is where that would go. If anybody's going to be working at CVS in the future, you can actually you can get into an ESPP or an employee stock purchase plan. Some companies out there are offering RSUs or restricted stock units, but this is where that would go. So if you got to this section, you didn't know what it was, it's because it doesn't apply. But if in the future you work for a privately held organization, a publicly held organization, then that's where you can put those. Any questions about stock plans? Anybody have anything they want to talk about other than CJ? No? All right. All right, loans. I'm sure that almost all of you have stuff in this section. So loans are one of the big things that tend to break up here. I got Fed loans to work on the first try. That is not always the case. So Fed loans is in there. So this is where all your student loans would go, first off, right? So if I log into your guys' accounts, I should see, you know, Great Lakes, Navient, Fed loans, random servicer X. And then it's never going to load in with the correct information, okay? But this is just for you. Student loans work a little differently, right? So when we get to student loans, we'll talk about kind of the magic of them, but this figure may not be exactly correct. So Right Capital is only going to read what the principal balance is, but likely you have what's called an accrued interest, meaning your interest has been building while you're in school because it's unsubsidized, and it sits in this side bucket called accrued interest that is not tabulated here. So don't get excited one day if your student loans look cheaper here than they do at Fed loans. Fed loans is correct, or at Navient, or at Great Lakes, or at wherever. And then I put a mortgage in here to pay for that house that did not show up here. This is also where you would have maybe auto loans. You'd have private student loans. So I should see Credible, Earnest, LendKey, or Splash. This is where you may have personal loans taken out. If you owe money to family, you could put it in here if you choose to. Maybe somebody has a boat, and this is where you'd put it. Anybody got any questions about the loan section? So I know this is like, it's slow and it's a little tedious, but this is, the idea is to get everything in one place. Historically, people used to have kind of one banking organization that they would work with, and they had one banker that would know all their accounts. But in this new world, like, you have accounts everywhere. I have 3 different banks that I use. I have 2 different credit card companies that I use. I have loans at this, and this. So this is one of the few places, or if you use like a Mint or any of those other aggregation tools, this is really the way to kind of see it all in one place and compare it all against each other. So hopefully you can get some value out of that. All right, so property. Property is where you would put any property that you own, right? So for us, we own a primary residence here in Arizona. It's also if you rent, if in this section it would ask you, do you own or rent, and then ask you to put the rent in there. So try to keep that up to date. Anybody have any issues with the property section? Anybody own a home? There we go. All right. Not talking to nobody. Okay, the insurance section. So the insurance section is terrible. So the insurance section does not want to accept any of your auto load stuff. So you probably had to manually update insurance in here. So when we get to the insurance section, we'll talk more about this, but this is where you would put in information, right? So here we have Joe Exotic has a $300,000 death benefit that he got through work. So it's 0 premium. Carol Baskin has the same thing, so it's 0 because she doesn't pay for it because it gets through work. When you got hired through a residency program into a hospital or through like the retail side, you probably got a big old fat benefits packet sheet, and it says you get all these things. Generally, there's like a 1x salary in there. So whatever your salary is, 1x you get as a life insurance policy. There's a bunch of other policies that you could have chosen. You could have choosed it. You could have selected to do voluntary additions. You could have chosen. I'm going to stop that. You could have picked accidental death and dismemberment. You could have filed for any of these other choices, but kind of that 1x is like a general option. Individual disability we'll talk about. So your employer should or may not offer short-term or long-term disability. And then during the insurance conversation, we'll talk about, should I have more disability? Whoever's in a hospital system, you're going to see people who come in to pitch you things to purchase. You're going to have other coworkers tell you that you need to have this, you don't need to have this. I can sell this to you. Talk to my guy. Don't talk to this guy. Kind of the full gambit of it, but we'll kind of discuss that during our meeting. Auto insurance. Hopefully, if you have a car, you have some kind of auto insurance in place. Again, this is really just a way to track it. So again, to see everything in one place. So if you have it, you can put the information, the pertinence in here and see it all in one place. Anybody have any issues, questions, comments, concerns with the insurance section? Nope. Everyone's just like squared away with insurance. Or just nobody has any. There we go, yeah. All right, so other is just magical miscellaneous box that says, if you own a business, you can put it in here. If you have a historical stamp collection, you can add it in here. If your family owns land in Michigan that has commercial property on it and you get a piece of it, there's that. Or if you are a partial owner in the Principality of Sealand, maybe you can add a piece of that. I don't think anybody knows what that is but me. So we got one. So this is where you would just add that other stuff, right? So if it adds to your net worth, then we want to make sure we're tracking it. All right, any questions overall with this so far? No. Did anybody just totally hate doing this? Kinda. No? Okay, I got one of these. All right, so the goals section. So in our next meeting, which is going to be really fun because we normally do it one-on-one, we're going to talk about life planning and goals. So this is where you would put some of those goals in. So I don't have any yet because we haven't done that section yet. So it should have defaulted you to add in these things. So it's got, hey, we want to retire at age 67. Hey, this is what our retirement monthly expense goal is. We haven't added it yet. Annual healthcare costs, annual retirement long-term care costs. Income, so make sure your income is in here. So when we do some projections later, it'll be in there. So we have salaries for Carol and Joe. Joe makes a lot for being in jail, but it still counts. Savings rate, so if you're adding to your employer-sponsored 401ks, 403bs, 457s, this is where you put those contributions in. Also, if you're putting anything into IRAs, in individual retirement accounts for Roth or traditional, if you're putting in HSAs, if you're funding 529 college savings plans, if you're putting X into basket Y, this is where you put that to track it for projection purposes. Expenses. So expenses we'll kind of talk about, we'll do on the budgeting side. So we're actually, at some point, we're going to bring in Tom. Tom is our budgeting specialist, and Tom is going to kind of give a whole discussion on how he believes people should be budgeting and some tips and tricks for how to go about budgeting. So if you wanted to keep that in here, you could. If not, you can just kind of go in that system. Family, this is where you put both family members, or if you have children, if you have other dependents, like family, like parents or siblings that you take care of, you can add them all in here. Any questions about that so far? No. Okay, cool. A couple other places you have some power. So you don't have all these tabs, but you do have what's called the vault. So the vault is where you can save data. So think of this like a Google Drive that you can connect with. So if you're working with somebody else, like if you're working with us and we needed to review a piece of information, so if ever you contact us on the side and you want me to review something for you, and I actually agree to do it, I don't want you to ever email it to me. So I don't want you to email me personal information ever, because that's just more likely to get stolen, and which leads to identity theft problems, which we'll talk about during credit. But the vault is a great place where we can share documents. So this is very much like a Google Drive folder. You can drop something in there, I can review it, and then respond to you. Does that make sense? You can also use these yourself, so you can have a private folder that we can't see. So if you just want to have access to something, if you don't use Google and you want to have some sort of drive, you can use this. You have access, we're not taking it away. So, all right. That's actually a new button. I don't know what that button does. Oh, all right. My human life value is only 900 grand. That's what I'm worth, guys. Oh no, Joe's only worth 738. So that's fun. All right. So let's go back here. So any questions about Right Capital right now? No. Okay. So the purpose of Right Capital, again, is to aggregate all that data. So that way, when we're talking about, hey, this investment, that investment, this is what these mean, you're able to go back to Right Capital real quick and see it all in one place. And you're going to say, oh, this is the account that I have. Oh, it's a 401k. Oh, I have a 401a. What's that? Robert, what's a 401a? And I'll be like, Kim, what's a 401a? Because Kim knows it better than I do. Pension plans could be in there, and everything will be in one spot just for review's sake. And then if we teach you how to use some projections, you can use those data as well. All right, so this one was pretty short, right? I'm gonna stay around for a lot of questions. We're not done yet, but in the future, these are again those topics that we want to discuss. Okay, so next meeting we're gonna have is scripture plan. So scripture plan, we're gonna talk about life goals and planning, and then after that, we're gonna start picking up topics. I want to start getting some vibes on what people want to be those first couple meetings, right? So what are we feeling? What are we vibing? What do we like? I know like employer package review was one that we wanted to do early, but we weren't going to get to it in time. Maybe with this enhanced schedule, maybe we get to that earlier. So what are we thinking?
Student loans.
Student loans. Okay. First person to say it. Love it. Love it. So we'll do
Salary negotiation.
Salary negotiations, really good. We did that one today with a client. Student loans and salary negotiation. Okay. So
Investment and retirement would be good too.
Yeah, so investment and retirement. Let me touch on that one for a minute. So we used to do investment and retirement in like one lesson with our clients. But it would take me like an hour and a half to do that if we're asking good questions. One-on-one. So 1-on-25, I feel like that would take forever. So what we're probably going to do is chop that up into 2 sections. So we'll do investments or retirements or retirements, right? So investments is going to talk about what investments are, what all the terminology means, how they work, how we choose them, how we select them, what's our philosophy, and then we can review some investments. Retirement would be, hey, this is where I'm at today. This is where I want to get to. How much do I need to save across this time frame based on what I learned in investments? Am I on track? What should I be planning for, right? So for most of you here, the investment side is way more important than the retirement side because it's like way out there. Not everybody, but it's still kind of why we chop them up. So just a forewarning there. So I think salary negotiation is good. Student loan planning, I think, is probably gonna be that first one, just to make sure everybody's on a good track and everybody understands it. So let's get student loans out of the way, and then we can jump to salary negotiation or something like that, investments. I do believe, go ahead.
Kind of going along with, I guess, like retirement things, can we talk about 401k, Roth, IRA, those things too?
Yeah, so that's right here at investments. So this investments, the reason it takes so long is because there's so much to talk about, right? This is not something you guys ever learn in school. This is just like, hey, you now have access to these accounts. You should pick one. And you're like, I don't know what any of this means. And then they're like, okay, cool. and you're like, all right, I'll do 5% into my 401k. They're like, traditional or Roth? And you're like, well, what does that mean? And then you're like, traditional? And they're like, well, here's your investment menu. What do you want to choose from? And you're like, I don't know. This one says stable value. Is that cool? Sounds cool, which just means cash. So don't do that. But that's that meeting. So we'll cover as much of that as possible. And that, I assume that will be a very question-filled meeting. But okay. So now let's talk kind of updated timeline. So is everyone in agreement that a month between these two meetings is way too long? Right? You guys probably forgot how cool I am in the past month. Maybe not. So I think that every other week is probably a good start. I don't know that I can get you guys in here every Monday. I can't even get everybody in here this Monday because work happens, life happens, right? You're no longer just in school and you can be on schedule. Now you have life that comes up, overtime shifts, extra hours comes up. So if we do today, July 13th, get organized, 2 weeks from today would be July 27th. And then I kind of finagle the system here. And this is where, because I was trying to avoid Labor Day. Labor Day is a holiday that I take off. I take very few holidays off, but that is one of them. So if we did July 27th, August 3rd, August 17th, August 31st, you get to see me 3 times in August, and then twice in September, twice in November, and we actually finish up in November. Does this sound good for everybody? All right, obviously these dates may work for you, may not work for you. They're gonna be saved in the slide deck in Mighty Networks. I'm recording this meeting. Thanks for the thumbs up, Carol. You get, the videos will be saved. So if you ever wanted to listen to me stutter through the word choose, again, you can go back and watch this and everything like that. So what it feels like right now is we'll do scripture plan next, and then we'll do straight into student loans. And then after that meeting, we'll pick the next meeting. So at the end of every meeting, because I imagine what's going to happen is we'll come up with a question during the end of a meeting that will totally change what everybody wants to talk about next. So planning these out too far in advance would just be a fool's errand. Okay, so this one we're going to call student loans because obvious, right? Okay. Now, my favorite part. Hopefully you guys have a lot of questions. If you don't, my saddest part. What questions do we have? Related, unrelated, on topic, off topic, life. I haven't been watching a bunch of shows recently, but I can talk about some. Anything?
Could we go back to banks one more time and why people have multiple bank accounts and things like that?
Mental accounting is why I have multiple bank accounts. Okay. So the reason I chop this all up is to protect me from myself. Okay. If I had one checking account and one savings account, right? That's pretty natural. When you go and you open a bank, they're like, all right, we'll open you a checking and a savings. Congratulations. That's what I had for a long time because I just thought that was what you're supposed to have. I would do all my checking out of one account and I would just put in the savings account until I needed it back for my checking again, and I would take it back. Right? That's kind of how that works. Savings is really just like my other checking account that I can only move the assets from 6 times a month. So what I did here is we name these accounts because I'm less likely to rob them if they have a name. Okay. So if I need money, if I'm going to go out this weekend because COVID's over, if I'm going to go out this weekend and party and a festival and I need like $400, I'm not going to steal from the dog money to do that, right? I'm not going to steal from the car fund to do that. It's either going to be in my checking or it's going to be in a like events fund, right? So that saves me from saying, oh, I have an account with, I have $50,000 in my banking. If I need to spend 40, I'm good to go. No, because I need to know like 15 of this is straight emergency savings. You don't touch this unless it's an emergency. I need to know that, this is set aside for Disney, because if I touch that Disney money, like I'm in so much trouble at home. All right. So that's why I separate it out. The other reason is because you may get better access to things at different banks. So I use USAA as my main bank. I use Ally as my high yield bank. Okay. USAA has savings accounts, but they only give me like point something, 0.05% return, which during the investment section, we'll call that 5 basis points. So 5 pennies on the dollar. So it gives me 5 pennies on the dollar. But Ally Bank gives me 1 whole percent. It used to be like 2.5. It's decreased. It's at 1%. So that's 1% is not a lot, but it's 20 times more than I would get at USAA. So if I'm saving a lot of money in an account, I don't want to save it at USAA. I want to put another account. All right. So like this emergency fund right here, this should not be at USAA. This should be at Ally Bank. Does that make sense? Aside from that, sometimes you just have relationships at other banks. Like you have this old Chase account, you want to keep it. I have this old, God, what's that? Gulf Coast Credit Union that my mom uses. Okay, Gulf Coast Credit Union is an account. I didn't even put it on here. I didn't even think about it, which is why you put it on here. Gulf Coast Credit Union is an account that my mom uses, and when she wants to send us money, she refuses to like use PayPal or Venmo or anything. So she puts it in my Gulf Coast account for me that I then have to find a way to try to access. But that's why you may have like other accounts. I don't know. How do y'all bank? Like what are people doing these days? What's the cool kids up to?
I have a quick question also along these lines. I use 3 different banking accounts, but to answer your other question, but in terms of USAA and having these different accounts, does it ever bounce? So like if I had those USAA accounts and I used multiple, if I did the same thing basically, and I was using the credit card, that would take away my power to say, for the, vendor to reject the transaction, correct?
I'm going to just say that again.
Yeah. So like if I'm going to make a purchase and it's a purchase, let's say with the Disney trip, let's say my Disney trip is costing over, it's $450 instead of $445 and I'm purchasing everything. Would it bounce or no? For that?
Super good question. Okay. So the way that I have these set up is these are all savings accounts except for my checking account. So I only have a debit card attached to one account. I have credit cards that are completely unattached, right? So I have a USAA credit card and I have a Discover card. And I use these separately for different things, right? So this one gives me better travel benefits. This one gives me 2.5% back on everything, right? When I make a purchase, I'm not going to use these accounts. I'm just going to use these accounts to pay off those purchases. So if I go and I buy Disney tickets, right, I'm going to use my credit card. So my credit card is going to give me 2% back. And then when I go to pay my credit card, I'm going to transfer money from the designated account.
Got it.
So they're really just kind of like a holding pattern. So it just separates it from me. If you have the ability to see a bank account with $10,000 and just know how it's all divided up, like you can like Rain Man it, or like the guy in Hangover, you can just see all the figures in your head. Cool. I can't do that. So I need to see it broken out because otherwise I'm going to go and get like more Whataburger because obviously I have a ton of money. Yeah. So it won't necessarily bounce. Now, if you had multiple checking accounts and you had like debit cards for each one of them, that could be a problem. But in my method, I just have the one main checking account that we use for everything. And then this kind of goes to zero every month, right? We have it divided up. We know how much we spend. It gets closer back to zero at the end of every month.
Got it.
These are good questions. What else we got?
I have a question. Under the budget function, is there any way we can add our own categories?
Kim, can they add categories to here?
Yes. Me and Tom figured out how to do it. Maybe we
I
only did it
logged in as myself.
There is a way that you can do it. Maybe hit action items right there down on the bottom.
I don't think that, because I'm logged in as us right now.
There is a way to do it. I'll have to play with it and remember because it's been a few weeks.
Can you guys see my screen still?
No.
All right, cool. Give me a minute. I'm going to try to play with this real fast. CJ, ask questions.
I have a question. So my bank is backwards in that my checking account gets a higher interest than my savings account. So we currently keep almost all of our money in our checking account and very little in our savings account. But it's like harder to do that division in my brain, and it doesn't allow for buckets.
What kind of rates are we talking about?
It's like 2.8%.
What? You're
Yeah,
telling me your checking account gets 2.8%?
I'm pretty sure that's what it is. I have to keep a minimum balance,
What's
and
the
as long
minimum
as
balance you have to keep, if you don't mind?
it's only like $1,000 each day, so it
Oh,
can't
guys,
go below that.
I want to remind everybody again, I'm going to naturally be really inquisitive and want to ask you a bunch of really deep questions. You don't ever have to answer anything that I ask, but okay, so what bank do you use?
It's a small town bank in this town we moved to for my job.
And they
Like
give
I'd never. It's just a local. It's like Citizens Bank or something.
Okay. So if it's backwards and they give you more in your checking than they do in your savings,
Yep.
and they don't you can't open multiple accounts?
I guess my husband and I could open separate accounts.
And then can you
But
transfer money in between them?
I don't know. That's a valid question. In between the savings and the checking, yes.
Mm-hmm. So in between two checkings, I imagine you probably could.
Okay.
There'd only be two accounts. So then what you'd want to do is you'd want to find like a bucket system, like a saving, like an Excel sheet where you just kind of track out what everything is.
Okay.
Some people go on the notebooks and they basically just have like a diary, basically like a journal. And they track out what everything is for. If you don't want to run a ledger on paper, you can run it on computer. If you don't want to run on the computer, you could honestly, you could manually break it out in Write Capital.
Okay.
And then not show it that way. That's a fun one. I think that's an amazing account privilege that they have where they're giving you that money on the checking account. It's not, oh, there's a chat. I wasn't even watching this chat function. Hopefully somebody's tracking that for me. It's not really common, but that's why people have multiple banks, right? So you end up with a bank where you get like 2% back on a checking account. Like that's now your savings account.
Right.
So
That's
then
how
you should be, you may want to be like using your savings as your checking. And then you can only make 6 transactions out of it a month.
Yeah, it still has that 6 transaction limit though. So.
Well, how many transactions are you really like transfers are you really making?
Well, I pay all of our bills out of our account, so several.
Then I mean, you don't
right now we have a home and a rental property because we're in 2 different towns.
I mean, you don't really need a savings account when you're getting 2% back on a checking account. You just need to make sure everything's separated properly.
Okay.
But that'll come down to budgeting. But that's a wonderful problem. But I don't know how you can do the bucket system with that.
Okay. Besides just good old Excel, which is what I've been doing. So.
Good old Excel, yeah. Unfortunately, there's not a perfect fix for everything, which is crappy. But
so Robert, maybe you could use this time to talk about what the rates are at Ally, what's a good rate, and why are rates what they are right now.
I wasn't listening.
Well, there's 2 things. So I've got 2 questions for you. First of all, what rate do we get at Ally Bank, and how does that compare to other banks? And the second is, and kind of it relates to that, is how much should we be keeping in Ally? Should we have, a year's worth of our expenses, 2 years, a month? What's the right amount?
Yeah, so we'll talk about that a little bit more during the budgeting session. But when we're talking about different banks, so every bank's going to be slightly different, right? So most of the big box banks like Chase, Bank of America, Citibank, they're going to have checking accounts that give you 0.01% interest. You're going to have savings account that give you somewhere between 0.02 and 0.08. And then you'll have bigger banks, like more online banks, like Capital One is going to give you closer to 1%. Ally, any of the online only banks should give you closer to 1%. There are some other banks out there, maybe like Barclays, and just doing a Google or a NerdWallet search for best high yield savings accounts is going to give you the most up-to-date data here. But they're going to be around the 1 to 1.25. The reason we want those accounts are because we want to keep our cash safe, right? I don't want to invest this money. I need it, but I don't need it like right now. So I can have it 1 or 2 steps away. And that's really the whole. So I want to be getting a little bit more than I am in my current bank. and I don't want to have total access to it all the time. But every bank is a little bit different in what they offer, and those rates change. So it's not like a CD or a certificate of deposit, which is what those are called. You're not going to get those. You have to lock it up for 3 to 6 months kind of thing. It's still a liquid asset that you should be able to maneuver as you will. Did I answer your question, Susan?
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know if you want to save this for budget, but do you want to talk a little bit about the general rule of how much to hold in that? Like, should we be leaving a ton, just a little? What's the general rule?
Go for it. I don't know the answer.
Well, you asked me to ask questions. So I think, Tom's our budgeting specialist, and he will go over this in extreme detail, but the general rule of thumb is to hold about 3 to 6 months of monthly expenses in basically an emergency account. That 1%, whether you're getting 1% or whatever it is right now, is very low historically. So any money you have in there isn't building a whole lot of wealth, and it's not working for you long term. So if you're finding you have much more than that 3 to 6 months worth of expenses, it probably makes sense to figure out something better you want to do with it, assuming that you're not planning on using it within the next few years. That's, we'll get into that detail in the investing section, but the long story is, if you're sitting on $100,000 in that account and your monthly expenses only run $3,000, then you're probably holding way too much and can figure out something better to do with it. And the flip side of that coin is, of course, if your monthly expenses run that $3,000 a month and you've got $1,500 there in one of those accounts, one of the first priorities you're going to have financially is to build up that emergency account so that, heaven forbid, if you get laid off or get in a car accident, have something happen to you where you can't pay your monthly bills or don't have that income source, you've got at least a few months to figure that out.
Dead on. All right. What other questions do we have?
Just curious, is there a minimum on starting that Ally savings account? And then also, how easy is it to get the money in there? Like, for instance, are you transferring USAA straight to the Ally account, or how does that work?
Yeah, so every bank is going to be a little bit different. Some of the older banks will give you, hey, we have high yield, but you have to keep 5, 10, 15. I've even seen like minimum balance of 100,000 to get like a 1% return. I'm like, who's this for? Like, who are you creating a whole website for that's keeping $100,000 in this account? That's like individual talk. But the Ally account specifically, the Capital One account, I believe, has a minimum, but Ally does not. So you can open it with $0. You'll generally fund it with a check, not a check, but like it'll send like $1 to make sure that the transfer works. But yeah, you just send it straight from your checking account. There's actually other tools out there that I've used in the past. So when y'all are ballers and you have like a ton of money that you're putting aside, there's tools out there called Max My Interest. Like, I want the most interest. I want to max my interest. And what that does is it allows you to connect a checking account, and then it'll actually go and open accounts at all these high yield savings accounts for you to put money away. So every bank account has insurance on them, right? So you may have seen like FDIC insured. So it's like, God, I wish CJ, tell me what FDIC stands for, like Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation.
Sounds good to me.
Pretty close. Basically what it means is if the bank folds, if the bank goes bankrupt, then the government will cover your accounts. But that limit is $250,000. Okay. So you're never going to put more than that in one account. So Max My Interest tells you to open up several accounts that all have $250,000 in it. So you can, for some reason, have $1 million in 4 accounts. But no, so I just connect to USAA or wherever my bank is. I set up a transfer and it just wires it over, no problem. When I need the money, I just transfer right back. It's not as fast as sending things intrabank. Man, my words are good today. It's not the same as sending things intrabank, where it's within the same banking system. But it's just like sending somebody money through Venmo. Like when you get money in your Venmo account, maybe it takes you a day to 3 days to get it back. The same thing would happen. But it's really smooth. And if it's not smooth enough to your liking, go find another bank that's doing the same thing. There's enough competition out there that you should find somebody that's doing exactly what you want. And if they're not, you should build it and just make all the money. I was trying to log in and create an account real fast in Right Capital so I could show you where that link's at, but I don't have it. So Kim, make a note to show me how to add categories, and we'll send out a thing. We'll post something in Mighty Networks on how to add categories within the budgeting section. What else we got? I'll give you some inspiration. Boom, we're back to that.
This may be a question for another time, but just curious between like the HSA insurance health accounts and like your other account. Like for instance, with my company, I had two options, the HSA or the other one. Premiums were about the same, but if you take out that $3,500, you can only spend that on your health side. So wouldn't it be better to grow the money somewhere else and save it on your own?
CJ's making like face. I love CJ's face. Okay, so health insurance we're going to cover in another section, but I think this is a perfectly good time to ask it. So an HSA is a health savings account, right? That's an account where you're able to put away that up to $3,550 per year into this account to use for future health expenses. Okay, to qualify for that, you have to have a high deductible health savings plan. So what you're describing, and I'm hearing it, is that should I do the high deductible plan with the HSA or should I do the regular health savings plan? It doesn't have the HSA available, but it has lower expenses, right? So it's got a lower deductible, but it may have different copays, right? So you really got to figure out what's most important for you there. If you're really healthy, if you're young and you're healthy and you don't expect to go to the doctor too often and you're historically not going to the doctor, then you don't care about the high deductible plan. So you want to get a lower premium. So the premium is the monthly payment. The deductible is what you have to match out of pocket before they start covering you. So if you're not going to go to the doctor very often, then you want a lower premium and a higher deductible. If you have family or kids or medical issues and you know you're going to go to the doctor, then you want a lower deductible because you want the insurance to start paying faster, which means you need a higher premium, right? So that's the question to answer first before the HSA. Which of these plans should I be in? Now, if I'm in that plan, should I invest in the HSA, right? And that depends on your own personal goals. So HSA savings are triple tax advantaged. So it goes in tax deductible, so it lowers your income, which also lowers your student loan payment. So it lowers your income. It grows tax deferred, meaning you don't pay taxes while it's growing. And it comes out tax free if used appropriately, which means if you take it out for a qualified medical expense or if you're over age 65. Okay. Now that or over age 65 is where it turns into this magical thing where now I can save it for retirement and I could never pay taxes on it, right? That's like a whole separate benefit. If we're talking about financial independence kind of conversation, that's what we want to go for. If you have health expenses, it's there for health expenses. And you're doing it with tax-free money, which effectively means you get a 20% discount on all health expenses if you use these accounts, okay? Ideally, again, you're only going to have an HSA if you have a high deductible plan, and you're only going to have a high deductible plan if you don't plan to use your money on medical expenses. So it's kind of counterintuitive there, but it's for that long-term growth. If your other competing goals are I want to save for a particular thing or I want to be really aggressive towards my debt, those are the decisions you make to say, you know, I'm going to get the high deductible plan because I want the low premium. I'm not going to invest in the HSA because I want to put those assets to better short-term use, which could be I want to pay down my private student loans, or I have credit card debt from when I was searching for residencies, or I just had to go furnish a new apartment because I didn't have any furniture other than the inflatable stuff. Like now is time. I'm a doctor. I deserve it. Like paying those things down. That's when you've got to figure out personally which of those goals are most important. And avoiding debt versus investing is an entire hour-long conversation. But early on, I think like you got to figure out what's most important for you. Did I answer your question at all, or did I just give you a bunch of information? A little bit. I think you said something.
Yeah, that was good. Thanks.
Cool. What else we got?
I don't know if this is appropriate, but can we talk about like auto loans versus leases versus like buying a car, like I guess kind of like navigating that when you're like early on in your career?
So you want to buy a car right now?
Well, I don't know.
You have a car right now?
No.
Do you need a car right now?
I mean, need is, relative.
Okay. Well, at least we're being honest. At least you're being honest with yourself. So the question of, and I'm sure we'll touch on this again. The only reason I'm going to answer is because I'm not positive that we're going to touch on this. So let's kind of give it a little bit of information. So the lease versus buy versus kind of like rent conversation, because that's actually in there as well. So lease versus buying of a car. So what a lease is, for those of you who aren't positive, right? So buying a car means you give them money, maybe you get a loan, and they hand you a car, it's yours, you keep it. Unless you don't pay your bills, they take it back. But a lease is you have a designated time period, kind of like you lease an apartment. So I get this car for 2 years. I'm responsible to make payments for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, I give the car back, just like you would with an apartment. Mathematically, we don't really like leases because you're going to pay more. So imagine when you get your car that you bought, you're going to pay this much for the car, and then if you have financing, you're going to pay interest, right? With a lease, you're going to pay all that interest up front. So you're paying more interest. At the end of your lease, you can either give the car back or you can purchase the car at the end of that. But because you paid for all the interest already, the car is going to be more expensive than it should be had you gone another way. Now, if you plan on driving a new car all the time, it can be argued that leasing is the better option because you can re-up your car without having to sell it. But that comes with its own issues of why do you need to drive a new car all the time? And are you balling that much out of control anyway? So I would say the very general information here, very general advice. Start putting aside money for whenever you're going to get a car, right? So let's say you want to get a car when states open back up sometime next year, when you have a place to drive to, other than just work. Start making that car payment now into one of those separate accounts. So you can feel the pain of what that car payment's going to be, whether it's a lease or a purchase. And then when you're ready to purchase it or lease it, you'll have a set aside of money, a chunk of money for it. And you'll already be used to your new budget of making that payment. So that way it doesn't surprise you. Kind of like when student loan payments start up for y'all and like, who knows when they're going to start back up. So either at the end of this year or sometime next year, depending on the Senate. Whenever we figure out when that date is, we're going to start wanting to make those student loan payments to ourselves early. So we know we can afford it. So it doesn't surprise you and you don't magically start having to pay $1,000 out of nowhere. So it's not a perfect answer for lease versus buy on a car. It's really going to be really a personal choice. If I'm giving advice to my friends and family, I never want them to lease a car. I'd rather buy a beater or I'd buy a nicer car. So let me get something that's going to push me through my residency, and then I can get a doctor car on the way back. Let me get a car that's going to push me until my family size is going to grow anyway. I'm going to have to get a new car. Let me get a car that's going to last for 2 years, just like a lease would, but cost me thousands of dollars less than a lease will. Kind of that aspect. But if you want to drive a new car every year, I'm not going to stop you. Just make sure you can afford it so you're not going into debt more than you need to. Does that help? All right, cool. Also, if anybody ever wants to start with, I'm not sure if this is appropriate, that's a perfect way to start a question with me. So who else has a question? Feels like nobody. All right. CJ? No? Okay. So here's what we're going to do. So I'll post this video. I'll post the slide deck. We'll post kind of anything that was pertinent to the chat. I used to be able to see the chat. I guess I can't see it because I'm in that.
Quick.
Go ahead.
Actually, in regards to, hang on. In regards to the budget, adding categories, if you go to the settings cog and then go to settings, under budget categories, you can do add category.
So there we go. So Brandon's over here with the clutch save. So settings is a little cog wheel. So settings, and then you can add the category that way. So we'll also send out a little guide on how to do that. But Brandon to the rescue. Thanks, Ben. Okay, so for the next meeting, we're going to do the scripture plan. So scripture plan is a life planning thing. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to send you all the questions that we would normally ask a client. Okay. What I'd like you to do is sit down and fill those out. Generally better over a beer or a glass of wine or some tea, kind of whatever does it for you, and kind of get in your feelings a bit. If you have a significant other, include them if you think that they're going to be included in these future goals. And then what we'll do is I'll kind of talk through those questions that we ask. If anybody wants to share, that'll be helpful. If you want to mention something and then it can spark someone else's inspiration, that'll be helpful. But that's what we'll talk about next. And then after that, we'll do student loan analysis. So come to next meeting ready to answer with those questions answered on your own, ready to share if you want to, and if not, ready to hopefully just like listen and then ask questions that are unrelated at the end of the meeting. Like normal. So I believe the date that we're saying for the next one will be July 27th. So 2 Mondays from now, same bat time, same bat channel, scripture plan, we're gonna have it. So any last alibis, any last questions, comments, concerns? No? All right, so we'll send some stuff out to you. I'll promise it by tomorrow. Is that cool, Kim? All right, Kim says it's okay. So we'll send it out by tomorrow. We'll update the video to Mighty Networks. This is a very short slideshow, but it'll be in there so you can have the dates for upcoming meetings. And then as we go, I'll just kind of update that for what topic we're discussing. Y'all have a good night. Thanks for coming in and thanks for being active. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.